Hey guys, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and since the World Championship match starts tomorrow, I thought I'd put the quick Rui series back on hold for a few more weeks, or at least for one more week, and do a little preview show of the match. Now, before I get going on this, I want to say that I'm very, very seriously considering doing a little series on the match, but one which is going to be for pay. And so what I'm thinking is this. I'm going to analyze all the games and distribute them in both PDF and PGN format. So those of you who have ChessBase or some other program like that can replay the games in the PGN file. For those of you who don't, you can still see the game in the PDF file and just replay it on a regular set if that suits your fancy. And then also, I would do videos, which I would mail to you guys. So it's not going to be posted here on chessvideos.tv. It would be something that I would send you directly, or send you a link so you can download it. And then you would just have it. So it would be for you guys. So the way this would work, though, is would be for you to send me $10, I think is what I'm going to charge to PayPal to my account. So if you guys are interested in this, if you think this is something you'd like, that you want to sign up for, drop me a note at historicchess@comcast.net. So historic chess, the two words run together with two C's there in the middle, at Comcast, COMCAST.net. Okay, so that's what I'm thinking. And again, I'm figuring probably about $10 is what I expect to charge. So if you're interested, let me know. If no one's interested, I'm not going to do it. But I'm at least leaning towards doing it at this point. So that's the deal. Okay, well, what I thought I would do now is just mention a bit about their head-to-head score. And it looks not very good for Boris Gelfand, to be frank. Initially, at the beginning of their careers, and they're only a year apart in age. Gelfand's a year older, but so the ratings were pretty close even from pretty early on. And early in their career, Gelfand seemed to have Anand's number. He won the first game they played was drawn, and then Gelfand won the next 3 games in a row. I think the next decisive result was a victory by Anand, which we're going to look at here, and then Gelfand beat him again in the next game, which is the next game we're going to look at. The bad news for Gelfand is that despite this fantastic start, he never won another classical game against him ever, while Anand has gotten quite a few in and has certainly dominated him in faster time controls too. So it looks certainly quite promising for Anand. Now there are lots of draws in there too. It's not like Anand just beats him game after game, but overall the trend, and it's a long-term trend now, almost 20 years, has been very much in the world champion's favor. So we'll see. Many of their games, and even with both colors, have been some kind of Slav or Queen's Gambit type of position. Generally a Queen's Gambit of some sort, but with Slavs and semi-Slavs dominating. Gelfand just about never plays e4. I mean, maybe he's played it a handful of times in his life. I should check. But really, he's by a huge margin a 1d4 player. Anand, of course, can play both moves. He's played more e4 in his career than d4, but he's played d4 fairly regularly recently, and so Gelfand really needs to be prepared for both moves. On the other hand, I don't think I'm sure Anand will have prepared for 1e4 out of Gelfand, but I don't think this is terribly likely to occur, except perhaps in some kind of desperate situation. All right, well, what I want to do now is show you a little bit more quickly a couple of games by the two players against each other. So the first one is a win by Anand. This is his first win over Gelfand. And the second will reverse the situation. It's the next game and the last game that Gelfand beat Anand. So let's start with this first one, won by the world champion, though of course at the time he wasn't the world champion. This was played back in 1993 in Linares. Gelfand has white. In fact, he had white in both games. But since Anand won this one, we'll flip it around. So d4, d5, c4, and then Queen's Gambit accepted. And this is something that Anand used to play more regularly. He doesn't play it so often nowadays. Okay, e4. Here black has lots of moves. e5, c5, knight f6, knight c6 are all playable. He chose c5. Okay, d5, knight f6, knight c3, b5, e6 is also played there. Bishop f4, queen a5. And here white, I think, usually plays bishop to d2 now, which has really scored pretty well for white. So this, I would say, is perhaps the main move nowadays. So e5, knight e4, knight g to e2, knight a6. And this is a very dangerous looking position in some ways for white. I mean, black's threat is really quite simple. He wants to play knight to b4 and then knight to d3, winning the queen. And even if it's not winning the queen in the given position, it's still really pretty worrisome for white. So what does white do here? Well, he doesn't play a3, but just kind of takes the bull by the horns here. He plays f3, kicking this out. And now this occurred in the same tournament in a game between Bilyavsky and Anand. And there Anand played knight takes c3, knight c3, bishop f5, g4, bishop g6, a4. And here Bilyavsky had some advantage. And after knight b4, king f2, bishop d3, a takes b5, stood somewhat better and went on to win. So Gelfand was, of course, perfectly happy to see a repeat of that, but Anand had prepared something very, very strong. So he played knight to b4. Not even protecting the knight. Well, of course, white more or less has to take, and he does. Knight to d3 check, king to d2. And now what does black do? The obvious move here is to play knight to f2, forking the queen and the rook, queen e1, knight takes h1, and then let's say g3. And this position is kind of interesting. Black is up the exchange and a pawn for the moment, but white's got this enormous center, has some lead in development. The knight on h1 is trapped. So it's kind of a difficult to assess position. Anand, in his notes, and some analysts at the time considered that white was certainly better here. If you run engines today, though, they still think that black is doing quite all right. And they're certainly aware of things like development and central control and all the rest of it. So it's not as if the engines just are completely oblivious to what's going on, to the assets of white's position. So maybe this is playable for black. Maybe this is not such a bad idea either. But Anand went for a more dynamic approach, and one that's at least arguably as good, maybe better. And that's started with the move g6, which is really an amazing move because, well, what exactly does it do? There's no threat right now to play knight takes f4 and bishop to h6 because of simply g3. So you could be forgiven for really being surprised and suspicious about this. But black's idea is just to keep developing, to play bishop to g7, take the pawn on e5, and then keep improving his position. And once that's gone, then maybe f5 or e6 after castling and putting rooks on the central files is really going to put a lot of pressure on white's position. The genius of Anand's idea is to recognize that this is very much a long-term pressure kind of situation. White's king is not going to get to safety anytime soon. It's just very hard for him to kind of unravel. So black has time to just pick up a second pawn, develop his pieces, and only then look to rip the board open. So what should white do? If he plays something like a4, then b4 is just simple and good. And there really isn't going to be anything fast enough for white trying to get pressure with knight to b5. So black is clearly better here. An interesting idea is to play d6 first, and then a4, and now knight to d5. But again, black just plays bishop to g7 and gets out in time. So now knight c7 doesn't do really much of anything, and meanwhile b2 is going to drop. The white king is still in trouble, and black is very much in the driver's seat here. And knight f2 is, of course, always kind of looming over white as well. So d6 is probably also not best. Another idea is to play g3, shoring up the bishop on f4 and giving the knight on e2 maybe the chance to leave. And of course also it just prepares development. And this is a reasonable option. Okay, so black is doing fine here. Certainly has good compensation for the piece, but but white's still alive. Another reasonable move is king to e3, getting out of the pin, stopping the fork on f2. So bishop to g7. And now, again, the white has to be a little bit careful. A very natural idea here is to play knight to c1 to attempt by force to extract this very painful knight on d3. The problem is, though, that after knight takes f4, king f4, there's bishop takes e5 check. The point being that after king takes e5, g5, the white king is stuck. He is going to get mated here. For example, well, the threat's f6 mate, so d6 is forced, f6 check, e6 check, queen b6, a5, queen c5, and the Lilliputians are rounding up Gulliver here. Well, okay, finally it's not Gulliver, but the queen, one of the big guns that puts the king out of its misery, but it's thanks to the work of all those pawns, g5, f6, e6, a5, and so on. Okay, so back here, knight c1 is no good. So g3, g5, bishop g5, bishop e5, and it's still just one pawn for the piece, but the white king is, again, it's just bad, and it's going to be bad for a long time. Knight takes b2 is a possibility, and black has good compensation. Still another idea after g6 is to play bishop to g3, bishop h6, but after king c2, b4, again there's trouble, and here, in fact, black is regaining the piece because after knight to b1, there's b3 check, which is mate except for a takes b3, but then queen takes a1 is winning. So that's not a very good setup, or not a very good reply for white. King c2, b4 is similar, so that leaves only the game move, which was b3. And this looks sensible, but in fact it's a mistake. So he's trying, of course, to undermine the knight on d3 and to save the pawn in the process, but this doesn't work out well. Bishop g7. Again, maybe bishop to g3 is better, but he played b takes e4, which is consistent. But after knight f4, bishop e5, maybe I should go back here. Maybe cb is better. Still bishop takes e5 though, and now material is even, so this can't be good. In fact, here already I think black is winning. So knight f4, bishop e5, knight f to e2, b4, and now black is regaining his material with a much better position. The white king is still vulnerable. Black's bishop on e5 is a monster. White's bishop on f1 is, it's a cuddly teddy bear by comparison. It's not going to harm anybody, and so white is really just in desperate trouble. So Gelfand found a pretty interesting idea here. He played queen to a4 check. And now, while he's down a lot of material, he's down the exchange after knight takes c5, at least he's got some space at this point, and he's got a passed c-pawn, and he can finish developing finally, and his king is okay. So the game continued with castling. Maybe bishop to g7 is a little bit better, but this is okay. Knight d3, a5, bishop g7 now. Bishop a6 is quite good. And you can see that all of black's pieces are operating very nicely. So this wall of pawns here does a pretty good job of restricting black for the moment, but with these strafing bishops and with opportunities to play things like e6 and f5, sooner or later these pawns are going to come under deadly fire. And also, depending on how white defends this check, e5 is also a serious worry. If, for instance, knight d to f4, well, then e5. You can't play d e6 en passant, it's illegal, and after bishop h3, just f5, and white's losing a piece. So he played knight e to f4, so now if e5, he has knight takes e5. But bishop takes d3, king d3, and now e5 anyway. Well, White was losing before, he's losing now, but the one thing that he's got as a result of this is that the d5 pawn is a passer too. So he plays king c4, and now rook e1. Here black might consider f6, but okay, he played f takes g3, and now e5. And all right, now black has to show a little bit of accuracy here. I mean, white is at least hoping he can just run these guys all the way down. d6, c7, put a bishop on b7 or h3, win one exchange back, and then keep on pushing the pawns. So that's the dream anyhow, but Anand, of course, is up to the challenge. So he plays bishop to f4. Now, if rook e4, g5 keeps the bishop on the diagonal, on the crucial diagonal. So hg3, bishop g3, rook e3, and now a very nice move by Anand. If he played bishop to h2, which looks pretty natural, then d6, and white's making progress. So Anand played the very elegant bishop to f4. And the point is that after rook to e4, now bishop to h2, here if white plays d6, the rook on e4 occludes the bishop on g2. It no longer defends the pawn on c6. So rook takes c6 check, and white is busted. Well, white's already busted, but that puts an end to even the last little hopes. So Gelfand played bishop to h3 now. Anand played rook to c7, maintaining the nice blockade. Rook e2, bishop g3, rook e3, bishop f4, rook e4, g5. So Anand makes sure that he loses a minimum of tempi in getting the bishop defended. Okay, well, so what does white do now? King c5. If he can't defend the c6 pawn with the bishop, he'll do it with the king. And so now again, he's ready to play d6. He wants to go forward and hopefully recoup a bunch of material. It's a lot. He's down a rook and a pawn here, so he's got to have something good. Well, Anand plays rook to e7, and that pretty well spells doom for white, who had to play king to d4 here. The problem is if he plays d6, then just rook takes e5, takes, and now what? If you play c7, well, you just give the bishop up for the remaining pawns, and black has pretty good winning chances with the exchange and 4 pawns ahead. So another possibility is to play bishop to d7, shielding the d pawn. But black has lots of ways to win here. One particularly elegant way, I think, is to play rook takes d7. Now, if c7, then bishop takes d6 check is trivially easy, and on c takes d7, bishop f6, and black wins by a tempo. If it didn't, of course, there would be many other ways to go, but this is simple. So a4, king c7, b3, takes, queen, takes, b2, and wins. And actually, I shouldn't say this is winning by a tempo, because even if white's king were already on c7 and he played d8 queen, and then took on g5, then there's queen g6, and even that ending probably is winning for black. So I should say it's winning. It's a trivial win thanks to that extra tempo, but it might have been winning even without it. Of course, going back to here, rook takes d7 is not the only way to win. So it's not that Anand, with all of this gigantic material advantage, just squeaked out a victory here. There would have been other ways to win too. Bishop takes d6, for instance, is surely winning. It's like a4. Sorry, c7 is a threat here. Well, okay, same thing. a4. If c7, bishop takes d6 check, king d6, rook a8, queen takes, b3, takes, bishop f5, b2, and you just push the g pawn and the h pawn and the rest and win that way too. Okay, so back here, Gelfand played king to d4, and now Anand breaks up this pawn mass. So once the e5 pawn is out of the way, then the blockade is just rock solid. There's no way for white to do anything. And he can't play bishop to e6 check here because rook takes e6 takes advantage of the pin. So the last try here for Gelfand was d6, but after bishop takes e5 check, rook takes e5, and then rook takes d6 check, Gelfand had enough and called it a day here. So a very nice win by Anand, and a really nice novelty too. So this b4 idea really put the hurt to white's idea. And again, what makes it especially attractive and appealing, I think, is that it was a long-term sacrifice. So there was no immediate knockout blow. He didn't play it to regain material or to obtain a direct and forcing attack. Rather, it just gave him a nice bind, lots of long-term pressure against the center and against the white king, and it proved more than even a player of Gelfand's stature, more than even he could handle. Okay, so this was the first victory in their head-to-head matchups, the first victory for Anand. Next, we'll take a quick look at Gelfand's revenge in their next game. And this was played later the same year, in 1993, in the Biel Interzonal, and Gelfand had white. So this time, not a Queen's Gambit accepted, but a Slav. And we have a Moran variation. And okay, black plays many moves here. Bishop to b7, a6, and b4, and also bishop to d6. So these are really four major moves. You've got to know all of them if you play this with white. Anyway, in our game, Anand played bishop to b7, and here the most common moves are castling and e4, but a3 is a respectable third choice. So b4, knight e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, and there are some alternatives along the way. And now here the main move is b takes a3. So this is the main move, and here white chooses between castling, which I think is the most common choice, and b takes a3. Okay, instead of this though, Anand played queen to c7, which has been played before too. And I think the move played at that time, before this game, was just to castle. Gelfand's a takes b4 was a novelty. It's a pretty obvious looking move, but still it was new. So bishop takes b4 check, bishop to d2, and already I think black needs to be a little careful. White has some chances for an edge. Essentially, what black wants to play, what he needs to play, is c5 at some early opportunity. But playing c5 before he's castled can lead to trouble with his king, and it can lead to trouble on the c file. So that's why this is kind of interesting. So a takes b4 is in a way double-edged. So it lets black develop more quickly and get castled more quickly, but it's also clearing the c file for some action there, and the a file too. All right, well, what does black do now? If he plays c5, kind of like a Bogo Indian, then takes, and rook c1, and white's got a little pull here. Next up, after he after the queen moves, he trades bishops and plays maybe queen to a4. So that looks at least like one possibility. Another idea might be to play queen c2 rather than trading. So white, I think, has a little edge here. Another Bogo style reply is a5. On this, white trades twice and plays queen to a4, and this forces, I think, queen to b7, at least if black doesn't want to sacrifice anything, and then castles. And this lineup with the queen on b7 and the bishop on a8 is a bit awkward, obviously, so white has a pull here too. So bishop takes d2 check was Anand's choice, and now knight takes d2, c5, so there it is. If he castled, then white plays b4 perhaps, and tries to clamp down. So c5, and now queen c2. So again, there's still some pressure on black. Obviously he can't castle because it hangs the h7 pawn. If he takes on e4, then knight e4, and this gangs up on the c pawn. So castles, and now knight takes c5, rook f to c8, b4, and now if a4, then queen to e4, breaks the pin, and prevents a takes b4 because of the underprotected rook on a8. So black has some things to be aware of there too. It's not so trivial, not so simple. So Anand played queen to b6. So he gets off of the pin on the c file. And now, all right, what does white do? If he plays bishop takes b7 and then dc5, then there's queen takes g2. And white may have some chances for pressure with queen to e4, but it looks like with f5, black manages to obtain sufficient counterplay. White could also consider castling queenside, which would lead to some crazy play. All right, but Gelfand played a more calm move, and I'm sure this is all still well within his preparation. So d takes c5. Now, black might like to play knight takes c5, but this is no good because of takes, takes, and queen to a4 check, and white has a dangerous initiative at this point. Black is not castling. So queen takes c5. Now, there's a later game that saw from here queen takes c5. This was played in Bareyev against Kramnik from Linares in 1994. But this really didn't promise Bareyev much of anything. Just a nominal pull, but Kramnik was able to maintain the balance and draw the game. So a little pressure from white, but nothing too terribly serious. So Gelfand's idea, though, was to play queen to a4, and you know, white's got some pressure still. Black has to prove that he can get out of this mess. So what do? The bishop's under threat, first of all. So you might think, well, let's just take it. And now we want a castle, and so let's save our queen and defend the knight on d7, so we can kill two birds with one stone with queen to e7. If queen to c7, this does not work out well. Rook to d1, rook to d8, and now queen a3. And not only is black not castling, but he's got some serious worries with knight to d6 check coming. So white is clearly better here. Alright, so let's try queen to e7 instead. Well, still rook to d1, rook to d8, castles, castles. But now just queen takes a7, and white is up a pawn for absolutely nothing. So bishop takes e4 is not going to get black out of the woods here. Well, how about queen to c7? So we defend the bishop and defend the knight and prepare to castle. Well, a similar idea shows up again this time. Queen to a3. What does black do? Bishop e4 we already know is not very good because of knight e4, and again, knight to d6 check is next on the menu. So knight f6, takes, and now we just go the other way, knight to c4. And this is not an easy position for black at all. If queen to e7, then check and castles. White's clearly better. If queen takes g2, well, knight to d6 check, and if king to d7, then white castles, and black is in a world of trouble here. But king f8 is even worse. It's just a forced mate from here. Knight f5 check. Of course, if king e8, then queen to e7 is mate. And if king to g8, then of course it's time for the hoary old smothered mate combination to do its work. So queen to c7 is not the solution either. So it looks like black is in trouble. But Anand found the way. Rook to b8. Okay, now what does white do? He's got a lot of choices here, but nothing that really leads to a clear advantage. For instance, if he plays queen takes a7, well, this is just bad. Rook a8, takes, king up. And although white has a rook piece and a pawn for the queen, it's not good. If he plays rook back to a1, then rook to d8 is really worrisome for black, because if white castles, then knight to f6 wins a piece, or wins material, not necessarily a piece. And on rook takes h8 here, then queen c1, and queen takes h1. And all right, maybe this isn't just outright an outright lost position for white, but white is in trouble here. Black is much better. So queen a7 is no good. If knight to b3, well, the knight's not dangerous from b3. So black just plays queen to b6, and he's okay. So, you know, he'll be able to castle because white has to do something about the bishop. Black threatens to just play bishop takes e4, excuse me, and castle. If white takes on b7, then rook takes b7, and then the knight is defended on d7, and again, black's ready to castle. So no troubles there. If rook to d1, then black just courageously takes because there's queen to b4 check, and now black might even be a little bit better. I mean, he's hitting b2. So Gelfand played just castled. And again, it looks like white has the upper hand because, well, castling hangs the knight, while on bishop takes e4, knight e4, queen b4 here, white plays rook f to d1, threatening the knight, so queen a4, rook a4, and now if rook takes b2, rook a7 just wins. So rook a8, and then rook c4, followed by rook to c7, and white has probably a decisive advantage at this point. So bishop takes e4 is not going to save black here either. So it's a pretty nice novelty by Gelfand. I mean, he had clearly worked this out and has black under some serious pressure, but Anand found the cure here. He castles. Now, we'll see what happens after queen takes d7 in a moment, but let's look at some options for white. Well, the basic idea is queen d7, rook f to d8, skewering the knight with the queen. So what can white try? If he plays rook a to c1, then queen to e5, and with the double attack on the bishop on e4, there's no worry about queen takes d7 here. So that's fine for black. If bishop takes h7 check, king h7, queen takes d7, here black needs to be a little bit careful. If he plays rook f to d8, for example, then queen takes f7, and if rook takes d2, then rook a4 is a winner. Rook h4 mate is coming. So bishop takes g2 is a better try. King g2, rook takes d2, rook a4, rook b4, takes, and queen e6. And I think we're going to see this position again later. Yeah, through a different move order. And stay tuned for that. There's something kind of cool coming up. So rook f to d8, though, the bottom line is that this doesn't work out well. Well, how about the immediate bishop takes g2? Well, this is even worse. King g2, rook b to d8, knight e4. Oops. Queen f5, queen a4. White's just up a piece. Game over. Okay, next try. Queen to g5, threatening mate on g2. So queen to d3 check, and now f3. And here I think black has pretty much full compensation for the pawn. So the bishop on b7 is pretty good. The rooks on b8 and d8 are good. Of course, white is also hitting the a7 pawn, so it's not like all the good stuff is black's, but black has enough for a pawn. Okay, another idea is queen to d5, and then white should probably defend the b2 pawn. I mean, if you get all the pawns on the same side, black's drawing chances are excellent. Maybe not 100%, but good. And then finally, one other idea here is to play bishop to d5, preparing rook takes b2, or threatening rook takes b2. And this should be equal as well. So it doesn't seem to me that... oh, sorry. Yeah, I was going to continue this line. Queen a7, takes, rook b2, knight f3. And it's hard to say if white's winning chances here are serious or not. So I think... I think it should certainly be a draw, especially since white's extra pawn is the h pawn, which is the least valuable way to have the majority on the king side. On the other hand, the knight can become better than the bishop with all the pawns being on one side, and if black makes the exchange, the double rook ending is not just an automatic draw, but still the draw is the likeliest result. All right, so, oops, just fixing something there. So neither rook a to c1 nor bishop takes h7 check is overwhelmingly promising, but at least the latter I think has its gives some chances. But so does the move, of course, played in the game. Queen takes d7. All right, rook f to d8, and now white can try to wriggle a bit with b4 or rook a to c1 as opposed to the move chosen in the game. So after b4, then queen to b6, and now all right, if knight to c4. Then this just leads to big exchanges and a dead draw. If queen to e7, then takes, and rook a7. But after rook to b2, the b4 pawn gets rounded up, and this is, of course, 100% drawn. So b4 promises little. Rook a to c1, on the other hand, also promises, well, it doesn't promise anything substantial, but it maybe gives a little something. Let's check and see. So queen to b4 is probably best, saving the queen, hitting the knight, hitting the bishop, defending the bishop, and so on. Rook c4, queen c4, queen d8, rook d8, bishop h7 check, knight c4, and then bishop to d5. And again, I think black's drawing chances are really good. And here, in fact, with pawns on both sides still, that maybe gives the bishop a little extra juice in the battle for the draw. But it should be a draw regardless. Okay, so Gelfand came up with the last try here. He played bishop takes h7 check. And this worked out. It worked very nicely. So here, Anand played king takes h7, which turns out to be a mistake, as we'll see. So the right move here was king to f8. Surprisingly, perhaps, but it's true. So queen to a4, rook takes d2, and now white is a pawn up and hitting a7, but the black pieces are very active, and white also has to be careful about g6, just trapping the bishop. So a safe way to go would be bishop to e4, but then after takes, and king to g8, not allowing any queen to h7 stuff, the b2 pawn is going to drop, and then there's nothing really for white to hope for by way of an advantage. So that's equal. Rook f to c1 is a bit more feisty. So queen to d5, queen to b4 check, king e8, e4, stopping the mate, queen d4, takes, rook a7. So now white's up 2 pawns. But black can, I think, maintain equality. If he plays bishop takes e4, this will not give it to him. So takes, g3, and of course black's problem here is that rook takes b2 is an outright blunder, as rook to c8 is checkmate. If he can't take the pawn, though, then, well, not only is white up a pawn, but he's also threatening rook c to c7, and that looks, well, should just be winning. So white is, if not winning here, then very close to winning. However, black can still maintain the balance with g6 at this point, locking in the bishop. So white has to spend some time trying to extract it with h4. Here black should play rook to d7, and it seems that, and this stops rook c to c7. Also, I should say h4, it reintroduces the threat of rook to c7 too. So h4 has more than one purpose. So rook to d7 stops the rook to c7 idea, and the position seems to be equal for white to avoid material loss associated with the bishop on h7. He's going to have to give back some pawns. Okay, so that's how black could have saved the game. In the game he played king takes h7. So now queen f7, and here black is already in serious trouble. What does he do? In the game he played rook takes d2, but after rook to a4 he was simply losing. Queen g5, threatening mate and stopping rook h4, but then g3, and now there's nothing to be done about rook to h4. So that wins the queen. Before we get back to the rest of the game, let's look at some other tries. If queen to d5, threatening mate and the knight, well, simply knight f3. And then if rook to f8, hoping, for instance, that if white plays something like queen to c7, that black will have rook takes f3, well, this gets refuted by a very nice move, queen takes e6. So here if rook takes f3, of course, you just trade queens and then take the rook, while if queen takes e6, there's knight to g5 check, picking the queen back up with the knight fork, and then white's simply up 3 pawns for nothing. Now, a more interesting try is bishop takes g2. Now, white could play rook to a4 again, queen g5, and then h4 with a small advantage, but it's much better to play king takes g2. Now, after rook takes d2, initially, Gelfand, in his first commentary, said that rook to a4 was a blunder because of queen to c6 check. Okay, we'll come back to that in a moment. What black needs to play here is rook to b4, and this transposes to a line that we looked at earlier, and I mentioned that this was coming up. So again, rook takes b4, queen e6, and white's extra pawn gives him good chances. It's 2 pawns, but 1 pawn once the b2 pawn drops. But okay, queen c6, what's wrong with this move? Now, white could get a draw here with queen to f3, because queen takes a4, queen h3 check, and then queen to e6 check gives white perpetual. But the best move here is king to h3. After queen takes a4, what else? Rook to g1. And there's nothing that black can do that's any good. The threat's just to give mate with queen takes g7, and there's no decent defense for black. If he plays rook to g8, then queen to h5 is mate. And the rest, there's nothing he can do. He can delay the mate by a few moves, but he can't stop it. So I think that after king takes h7, black is already close to lost. So again, the one possible defense is to play rook to b4 here and fight in this ending a pawn down. In the game, after rook takes d2, rook a4, queen g5, g3, as I said, there's no good defense to the threat of rook h4, and the game ended a few moves later. So White's got a queen and 2 pawns for a rook and a bishop, and the only thing that White has to be careful about is that nothing bad happens to his king. Anand, of course, tries to make that happen with rook to d6, but h5 takes the g6 square under control. Bishop e4, queen e7, hitting the rook and the pawn on e5, rook b to b6. And again, a nice try, right? I mean, he wants to still play rook to g6 check, h takes g6, rook takes g6 mate. I mean, so we can illustrate this. So check, and that's mate. So queen takes e5 takes care of that problem, because now on rook to g6, hg, rook g6, queen g3, and there's nothing obviously to fight for at this point. So he tried rook to e6, again hoping that Gelfand would be sloppy and take his queen off of the crucial diagonal there, but he doesn't. He plays queen f4, and now with f3 coming, Anand called it a day. So a nice win by Gelfand. I mean, it's, let's say, a typical game for contemporary top-level chess. He found a nice idea. It doesn't win, but it posed some problems, and at least, on this first outing, Anand was unable to solve them. The key moment coming here, where he didn't realize the need for king to f8, or perhaps missed something when he was analyzing that, and the idea paid off. Well, hopefully these guys will have some fantastic ideas for us in the next few weeks. Again, play starts tomorrow, and I hope you guys will sign up for my little project there. So again, if you're interested, historicchess@comcast.net. Drop me a line, let me know, and I'll see you there. All right, take care. Bye-bye.